Welcome to Between Two Chairs, Demystifying Commercial Real Estate, the podcast that brings you the latest insights and trends on the South Florida commercial real estate market, with your hosts, Fernando Arencibia Jr. and Jennifer Woolman. In each episode, we dive into the world of commercial real estate and break down complex concepts to make them accessible for everyone. Whether you're a real estate professional, a curious investor, or just interested in the South Florida market in general, Between Two Chairs is the podcast for you. So pull up a chair and join us.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Between Two Chairs. My name is Fernando Arencibia, and with me, as always, is the incredibly inventive Jennifer Woolman. Jennifer, say hi.
Hello, everybody.
So Jennifer always has a surprise for me. Not always, but most of the time. And you guys know that we do this kindergarten series where we've read a lot of different books because, I don't know if you guys know that, but everything you needed to learn, you learned in kindergarten, right?
100%.
100%. And now you brought me a book called A World Wonder by Laura Whiffler, which I just read. And so I would probably not do it justice if I do the introduction. So Jennifer, introduce us to A World Wonder.
Sure. So as you guys know, poor Fernando doesn't know a lot. We never talk about what we're doing.
You can leave it right there. Poor Fernando doesn't know a lot.
Doesn't know. Well, I meant a lot about the books because on our schedule, I just put kindergarten series or interview with so-and-so, and that's it. But on this one, I didn't even put the title. So he found out today when we were coming to record what the title was.
I love it.
And so this book, A World Wonder, continues our February theme of the power of people and place. And although on the surface it's a beautifully illustrated a book for kids, it's really about taking a look at community and the power of place and how our differences make places stronger. So it's not about diversity of people or cultures, it's a diversity of place and thought and ideas, which I love. And that's where the real estate comes in, because whether we're developing, leasing, or investing, what we're shaping isn't really buildings. You and I talk about it all the time. It's about community and how people experience those buildings and that community in the world together. So we always speak about that, but let me sum up the book a little bit. It's a young girl, Cora, starts out seeing a house on a hill. It's in a great location. And she's like, one day I'm going to fix up that house on the hill. And I don't know if I'm going to make it a bed and breakfast or an amusement park or whatever. But she starts thinking about it. So she plants a little seed in the back of her head. She grows up to become an architect, and her goal is to create a world wonder. So she goes on to build museums and schools and all sorts of different beautiful architectural things, and people are like, oh my gosh, that's a wonderful building. And she's like, no, but it's not a world wonder. So after years of traveling the world and doing all these buildings, she returns home, and of course the house is still available, and she decides she's going to buy it. So she buys it and is like, well, what am I going to turn it into? And as she's thinking, she's like, well, I'm just going to fix it up for now while I figure out what I'm going to do with this space. And she's walking in the woods behind the house one day, and she sees some kids building a fort. And she's like, oh, what are you guys building? And they're like, oh, a fort. It's going to be a world wonder. It's going to be the best fort in the world. And she's like, would you like some help? So they start working, and with their collaborative ideas, they build a fort, and it has tunnels, and there's zip lines, and there's all sorts of stuff. Anyway, so she goes through this whole thing, and then the community starts to see it, and they start coming, and they're like, wow, this is so creative, and this is so wonderful. And she really enjoys the process. It's unlike anything she's ever built. And she goes back to her house, and she's like, you know what? I'm going to keep my house just the way it is. I'm going to live in it. And I like the memories created here. And she gets approached by a reporter one day, and they're like, you've created all these world wonders as an architect.
What are you most proud of?
What are you most proud of? And she opens her front door to the community. And she's like, I'm most proud of these people in this place, right? Anyway, so that's the basis for the story.
What I really enjoyed is, of course, she goes on a journey in her life, and you could tell from a young age she was very creative, and she had a lot of ideas on how to make things, to transform them from what they are into something new. And as she's going around building museums and schools and, you know, all these civic projects, you know, around the world, you know, I think that there is a sense of excitement to do that work, but, you know, she still doesn't consider that to be a world wonder until she actually gets back home and she again takes over ownership of that house. And let me just say that there is some real estate, both on the residential and the commercial side, where you almost, and I've spoken to people who own this kind of real estate, where they almost don't feel like they are the owners of the real estate. They feel like they are the stewards of that property. And they feel like for as long as I have ownership or stewardship of this property, I'm going to make it, you know, I'm going to either preserve it or I'm going to make it as best as I can. And that's kind of where I see for her is that house holds a place, and that property holds a place within the community that is very special. And it was really interesting that this is the first home that she did not transform. She likes it just the way it is. So, you know, I thought that was a really interesting take. It's a really interesting story for children. You know, it's not a typical, you know, book, no. Right, a kid's book, but I love it because it's going to generate. I'm sure when you read it to a kid, it generates a lot of thoughts and a lot of ideas that you normally would not find in other children's book. And it's interesting because we just finished in our prior episode interviewing the, you know, economic director for the DDA, MJ, who really spoke about, to your point in our discussion, a lot of the same themes from the book are in that conversation.
Are in the DDA, the goals of the DDA. And one of the things I loved about this book and that I think highlights Miami, right, is so she travels all over the world. Think about how easy it is for people to travel to Miami and for us to travel to other places. And the ideas that ability and ease of travel allows us to share either where we're going or where we're coming back from. Yeah. And those ideas help create one of, I think, the most powerful ideas in this book, and that is that place and people really are inseparable. And we talk about the interconnectivity of our buildings and our community and everything, but the idea became so clear to me in this book, and where we live shapes how we connect. You know, it becomes who we are. To your point about our interview with MJ, we were talking about how easy it is or how crazy it is that we can be at an ultra concert one night and be eating at a great restaurant at a little, you know, or having a cafecito at a ventanita, and then be down in, you know, one of the food baskets for green beans and Homestead all in the span of a day. And that diversity of place that Miami offers, I think, is really unique. And then the fact that so many of the places that have been created that are, I think, you know, world wonder. I look at PAMM. I look at that beautiful, beautiful building that was built. I look at, you know, the Freedom Tower, which is significantly older and a totally different type of building.
The soon to be finished Signature Bridge.
Exactly.
And all of the linear park that is being built underneath it and its connectivity to the World Center. It's really incredibly impactful. And one of the things that you and I always talk about is, you know, residential real estate deals with housing, which is a universal need and is incredibly important. But a big part of that is in the commercial sector, we talk about community, right? All of the places where you congregate, where you go shopping, where you go get together with your friends to have a bite, you know, those are commercial places. So commercial places are where communities really get, you know, developed. And one of the things I loved about the book, which I think correlates with our conversation with MJ, is that she had a lot of ideas for what to do with the house once she bought it, right? And it was her lifelong dream to own it. But then when she heard the kids, they wanted a Ford, and then she heard from other people what they wanted, and she helped them build it. That was more special because the people that lived there had a say in it, right? And they had ownership in it, and then she helped them bring their ideas to life, right? Which made it even more special. And I think it's the same thing in our conversation with MJ, where he speaks about how important it has been in the DDA to get input from the people that live, work, and play, the community, you know? And I think that was a great lesson in the book.
Well, and to your point, you know, in commercial real estate, we often talk about traffic counts or demographics or ROI or whatever. And in this book, it didn't talk about that at all. But the underlying current was that location, which we always talk about, location, is really emotional, cultural, and social.
Right.
And so including the residents for a FIFA rally that might not be going to the World Cup games, but including the residents who live there with events that are happening at Bayfront Park. That was a huge goal of the DDA, right? Because it's bringing all of that together. And again, what is more culturally and socially diverse than Miami? So
I also enjoyed that, to your point about the metrics, about, you know, traffic counts and all that stuff, but there is something, and I think this is why you like retail so much, but I think it applies to a lot of different, you know, asset classes within commercial. But you could look at all the metrics that you want. In retail, when you go to a place that is working, you just know that it works.
You can feel it.
You can feel it. Like, man, this works. The curation of the combination of tenants that are in there, the way that it is laid out, you know, the intentional things that people do to make it more convenient for everybody to come in and out. I mean, there is an incredible sense where you just, you know, it either works or it doesn't, and you can see it, you can feel it, you know, you can touch it. It's very tactile. It is an experience.
Well, and I think that's a great point. So things that work and that feel right, you think, oh, well, those people got lucky or those people did it right. But it doesn't happen by accident. It happens by design. And you start looking at stuff like we also talked about in that interview, which was the food hall, the recent iteration of the food hall that's happening at the Brightline Miami station.
Oh, yeah.
And how, you know, it's not just the people that are riding Brightline that are enjoying that space. Right, or enjoying those restaurants, because the design of the restaurants that are in there was intentional. They intentionally brought in restaurants that were going to be unique to that building and that were going to have a much higher draw than the people who are riding Brightline. So the people who live in the building, the people who work within, you know, X mile radius of that building, and engaging that space beyond it being just a place where people pass through coming or going somewhere. I love that.
Yeah, I think that is really, I'll tell you, just because you and I have taken the Brightline many times, and, you know, I've taken it like 10 times by now to Orlando and back, and that food hall is a great representation, right, of the food scene in Miami, and it is incredibly diverse. It was very intentional in the way that they designed it, and to your point, you know, I have mentioned it, you see people that are coming in to town, whether they want to catch a Heat game or they have a concert to go to, you know, it's a great opportunity for them to get that flavor and to have that experience without having to, you know, make reservations elsewhere. I mean, it's really interesting, the dynamic, the way that they have built that.
Well, and I think that's very community centric, and I'm so happy to see that we're becoming, I think, as a nation, more conscientious of who we're building for, right? Like, how are the spaces that we're building going to bring people together? Before, it was just like, what's the highest and best use for this property, right? Yeah. And it was more like driven by who's going to come here, or do we want it to be retail or office or whatever? And now I feel like with developments like the World Center, right, that was very, very intentional, and it took a really long time to plan and everything. But who do we want to be here? What is the lifestyle going to be like? How is it going to bring people together? And so within World Center, not only have they done an amazing job of curating retail to bring in not just the residents of the building, but residents from outside the immediate built towers that are on that property, but also public plazas and public art so that people walking through become more engaged with the space. Very walkable by tying it in. You know, some of the developments that were done back in the 90s, and I'm specifically thinking of Sunset Place, which is a retail development with some residential on top, but it totally tried to encapsulate all of the traffic that was going to Sunset inside that building. It wasn't inviting for people passing by to just walk in and cruise in. It wasn't inclusive of the outside community, and it failed miserably. It's going to be torn down and rebuilt again. Right. So seeing something like the World Center, which was open and inviting so that you don't have to be a resident to enjoy the public spaces and places, to me was huge. And I felt like that was part of what this book also helped highlight, was that community isn't something that's an abstract idea that just happens randomly. It's something that is lived daily. Right. You know, walking to work and you take a shortcut and you see the public art at World Center, or getting on the Metro Rail or the Metro Mover and seeing the buildings around in all of the public spaces along Bayfront Park. So
I also would say that there was something that the book really reminded me of, which is that there is a balance to be had between the old and the new. To your point about not everything needs to be developed to its highest and best use, because people always think about, when they hear highest and best use, they're thinking about maximum density, or they're looking at what is the max that I can build on, you know, based on the zoning of that land. But there's a reason why those two words are combined, highest and best.
Right.
What is highest is not always best. Right. And so you could develop something that is not the max, but that it combines, this is the highest that we should go in order for it to be the best. Right. And there are little experiences, like aside from DDA, for example, the Miami-Dade Heritage Trust, right, for years has worked to preserve some of the bungalows in Little Havana, right? Because this is an area of town that has a lot of 1925, 1930s properties. It is the oldest real estate in Miami, let's be honest. And these bungalows were, you know, beautifully designed, and it is an encapsulation of a moment in time. And one of the things that they did is they were able to acquire one and renovate it to be a showcase for others, which right now it's being used as an office, and it's a beautiful bungalow. Every time I pass by it, I'm like, man, that would be such a cool place to work, you know, and what a beautiful thing that they did to renovate this. And unfortunately, a lot of the bungalows have gotten demolished, you know, but some people did take on that experience of saying, wow, I can actually remodel this and it's going to be beautiful, and it'll last me another 100 years. Right. And we've seen it happen. And interestingly, there's like a little bungalow that is, you know, very close to the bridge into downtown Miami. It's off of Flagler Street and like 8th Avenue. And this little bungalow is being used as an Airbnb. Right. And the owner is this lady that has basically done a beautiful renovation of it. And year over year, you would not believe this is one of the highest, you know, she's like a super host. People love to stay in that bungalow. They love the experience of being, because it's a different perspective of Miami, right? They get to be in Little Havana. It's a different flavor. You know, like Miami has a lot of flavors to offer. And you wouldn't believe it's one of the most sought after, you know, Airbnbs. And so there are places that, just like she realized in the book with this house on the hill, there are places that are just perfect the way they are.
Well, and I think to your point, you know, placemaking at the end of the day is really just storytelling. The difference is it's telling the story about an area. So you look at these little bungalows, and what's the history of the bungalows? What's the culture? That's what gives you the flavor of an area, and why the flavor of Little Havana is different from the flavor of Coconut Grove, is different from the flavor of Miami Beach, is different from the flavor of Coral Gables or even Homestead. And
That's right.
To your point, the ones that integrate that, right? Because there's always going to be change in buildings that maybe can't be saved, but, maximizing adaptive reuse in an area with a building. So taking a bungalow and making it office or whatever, and having murals or art or events that help tell that community's story. Mm-hmm. Going back to your original point about retail, then it's not just the store that feels right, it's the community that feels right. Correct. Because its flavor is authentic. I mean, you go to Little Havana and you see the Domino Park and the Roosters and all the Cuban cigar shops and everything, and you really get a feel, whether it's a new building or one of the original buildings built along Gallocho or Flagler, that you just feel different. That's and you can really embrace the culture. So absolutely.
And this is what I love about doing this kindergarten series, is that because it's not like we're doing a review of the book, but there are little things in the book that always trigger ideas that are impactful and important to commercial real estate, that are impactful and important to real estate as a whole, and to really, building communities. I also love to your point, it's also a combination of design and the effectiveness of that investment. And this is another thing that triggered in my mind, because I remember seeing an urban developer do a presentation, and he spoke about when Eisenhower built the highway system, that it would take them, before the highway system, because he was old enough to be in a town in the Northeast where, in order for him to go visit his grandmother, it was a 4-hour drive through dirt roads and, poorly created, roadway systems. And then with the new roadway system, that thing got cut down to an hour and 45 minutes. So incredible impact. Mm-hmm. But when he would leave his house, they would go through a gravel road to connect to the main road that then will connect to the highway, right? And then they paved that road. And then he goes that saved us like a minute and a half. And the expense of that road today, he says, is an incredible expense to the city that has to continue to maintain it. And really, it didn't really add a lot of efficiency, right? They could have had that gravel road forever and, and not ever have to maintain it. And it would have been a minute and a half longer, right? Just to connect. So, those little things that are a combination of, I guess, form and function are really an interesting dynamic when you're talking about placemaking. But I love this, and I would say we would love to hear from you. If is there a book that you read in kindergarten or that you're reading to your kids that are triggering an idea in real estate that you would like us to read and consider for our kindergarten series here in Between Two Chairs? We would love to hear from you on that. Without further ado, we want to say thank you again for listening to us on another episode of Between Two Chairs. For Jennifer and I, we are going to say
the end.
Bye.